What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a preview for Week 9 of the NFL season. Let's jump right into it as we always do. If you are new to the series, we're going to run through the NFL slate position by position. I'm going to use the tools that I've created. Everything you see is something that I've done myself, and it's available on dfsondemand.com. So a pretty interesting slate this week. The quarterback position, that prized position, you can see how many good matchups a lot of these top players or top quarterbacks have. And if you watched this before, you've heard me talk about the fact that those rankings on the DraftKings lobby really dictate a lot of ownership. The casual fans flock to those green numbers. So it will be interesting to see ownerships this week. Throughout a couple other positions, I have some matchups that they might look worse on paper, but we'll talk about. So we'll get there. But let's talk about quarterbacks, and I'm going to flip over to my cheat sheet. So this is for this week, and this is now live on DFS On Demand. It took me a few hours later than normal. I was making some updates to the website. So here we're sorting by quarterback, or we're looking at quarterbacks, and we're sorting by their projected DraftKings points for this week. It should be no surprise that Deshaun Watson is not only the most expensive quarterback on the slate, but he's also my highest projected quarterback on the slate. And if we look at what he has done this year, it's incredibly impressive. Okay, and you can see that his salary, that red line, has obviously followed him with his great performances, but hasn't scored less than 25 DraftKings points in any of the last 5 weeks. You know that he's doing it with his arm, he's doing it with his legs. He's facing Indy, which, has given up the second most DraftKings points to opposing quarterbacks this season. So if we go to Indy by quarterbacks, here they are. So here's the second most DraftKings points allowed this year. And there are a bunch of names on this list of guys that are not nearly as good as Deshaun Watson, or nearly as dynamic, or nearly as fantasy relevant, right? There's like some kind of crappy names on here. Like Brian Hoyer just got cut. Deshaun Kaiser, Carson Palmer, Jared Goff, like these aren't big names, right? And they're giving up the second most DraftKings points. So Deshaun Watson probably going to be causing Indy quite a few fits this week. And then there's a couple other guys that I'll just lump together here. So it's Dak and Alex Smith at 6,700 and 6,500. And they're my next two highest projected quarterbacks. Both of these quarterbacks kind of jump off the page at me. Neither team has fared particularly well against opposing quarterbacks. This is the highest point total on the slate. It's a 51-point total according to Vegas, with Kansas City being a 1-point favorite at the time of this recording. So that would imply both teams are on track to score a lot of points. Essentially I do math on the spot, a 25 and a half to 24 and a half final. Is that right? Somebody do the math for me. But implying a lot of total points from each team here. So just to dive a little bit deeper into these guys, let's look at Alex Smith real quick. So here's Alex Smith, and if we just look at his last 5 weeks or so, how about this? All right, last 5 weeks, averaging 23.1 DraftKings points. You know that he has a little bit of upside. Dak in that same time frame, averaging 22.9. So these two quarterbacks fairly even. Now you notice that Dak, he actually laid a pretty big egg against Washington last week. So that includes, included in this number is that game where he only scored 7.3 DraftKings points. So, you'd say Dak has, very significant upside. And then there's always the Ezekiel Elliott effect here. So again, at the time of this recording, Zeke is suspended for this week. I think there's one more chance at an appeal that might get him back in the lineup for Sunday. If we've talked about this before, where if Zeke doesn't play, what's Dallas going to do? Are they just going to put the ball in the hands of Prescott and let him win or lose the game for you? That seems kind of likely. We'll see. We have no idea. But when you remove a dynamic player who has a ton of usage like Zeke, and you have another dynamic player at quarterback who can kind of maybe eat into a little bit of that usage, it makes sense for them to take advantage of that and let Prescott win or lose the game for you. So I'll be interested to see. And then finally, if you're desperate, let's look at Jacoby Brissett. Okay, so here's Brissett, and if we go back here's his full season. So if we go back to, let's do it like this. Let's do the last 6 weeks. Averaging 17.2 DraftKings points in that run. Speaking of running, you know he can use his legs. Very likely he is going to have to throw a ton in this game. Houston is, I believe, a 13-point favorite, so Indy is going to be playing catch-up all day, which means we're probably going to see what we've seen from Brissett in the past, which is the last 3 weeks of 37, 37, and 39 pass attempts. Wouldn't be crazy to see him throw it 40 times, can run it a little bit, so he comes in at a pretty decent price. Here he is at 5,200, and he's like my 10th ranked quarterback, so that's not bad for a guy who's priced near the 5,000 mark. All right, we'll flip over to running backs here, and I'm holding off on removing Zeke from the player pool here, from the cheat sheet. I will probably do that later in the week after we kind of see what happens, but he was my highest projected running back of the week. That will now go to Kareem Hunt, who pretty significantly over the next set of running backs is his projection. Again, we talked about this game in Kansas City, and we're going to talk about it a few more times. High total, a lot of points being scored. Kareem Hunt obviously going to be heavily involved in that. And then let's look at Kareem Hunt's game logs. Okay, so here's his full season, and I'm always interested in players who have a pretty crappy game, which is what Kareem Hunt did against Denver, and then their price goes up. How does that affect ownership? Normally, in a normal week, I would say that player will be underowned. He's hurt a lot of his owners from last week. They're jaded. They're not coming back to him, especially when his price goes up to now. I think it's 8,100 this week. So I say that should usually drop the ownership. But if he's now the most expensive running back on the slate in this game with a high total, I'm not sure how much it's actually going to impact it. So just keep that in mind. But again, this is a great game, a great over/under. Hunt should be heavily involved. I'm not going to hold it against him that Denver kind of shut him down for a while. He still had 22 rushes and 5 more targets. So again, he's just heavily involved in this offense. I'm willing to buy back in here. And then the other guy that popped up on my cheat sheet and ranked pretty highly here that I wanted to make sure I talked about was Lamar Miller. So here's Lamar Miller at $6,200, and you can see, I mean, he's my highest projected player under really $8,000 here. And we can talk about why that is. We can go through his game logs. And you'll see over the last 4 weeks, so I'll just narrow this down for you. Here we go. Averaging 18.3 DraftKings points. He's scored 4 touchdowns, 2 of them coming through the air. You can see he's notching a few receptions essentially every single week here. And with Houston being a large favorite, like we talked about, 13 points, you would suspect that Lamar Miller gets very close, if not breaks 20 rushes this week. So I envision a scenario where the game script plays out where Lamar Miller is just fed the ball over and over and over again because they might be up so much, especially late in the game. And he's playing really well. So I think this is a really good combination. My projections seem to bear out something similar there. So Lamar Miller is a guy that I'll probably own a pretty significant portion of. And then the last guy I feel as if I need to mention is Alex Collins, who actually will do it like this. Here's something cool. We'll do it like this. So here are the last 3 weeks of running backs for the Baltimore Ravens. Alex Collins has led the team in rushes each of the last 3 weeks. You can see 18, 10 in week 7, and then 15 in week 6. I think that's a good sign for Alex Collins to lead the team in rush attempts for 3 straight weeks. I think you're getting a pretty good price on a guy who is likely to see 15, maybe more carries. Collins is pretty cheap here. Whoops, misclick. $4,600. So you probably won't find many other players in that price range with the ability to lead their team in rushes. Baltimore, outside of last week, and their offense hasn't been particularly explosive, so I don't know how many points they could actually score, but the running back position is usually a volume position, so finding those guys who are priced in that range who are actually going to get touches is going to be very, very important. All right, let's move on to wide receivers, and we'll take a look at the projections here. No surprise, DeAndre Hopkins up here. It's the targets. He's coming off a massive week. He gets Indy. We've talked about this game over and over again. That's probably no surprise there. I'll skip Nelson Aguilar right now. We'll talk about him in a second. AJ Green, I think, is interesting. So he gets this matchup with Jacksonville, and let's actually go back onto DraftKings for a second. And by the way, I've gotten so far off of the DraftKings lobby in any form of research, so I apologize if I just don't even show it, but these tools are just a better way for me to flip through a ton more information and easier to get it. But here's what's interesting. AJ Green in, quote, the worst matchup on the slate. Okay? So if you're a casual fan and you open up this lobby and you are ready to buy a wide receiver, do you buy Mike Evans against New Orleans? That seems pretty good. Do you spend less and take Michael Thomas against Tampa Bay, the 30th, the second best matchup? Will Fuller, who he will regress. I love what he's doing, but that's unsustainable. So you're looking at the pricing, and there's no reason, if you're just looking at this DraftKings lobby, to buy AJ Green. There's no reason to. But you got to go a little bit deeper than that. So let's actually look at Jacksonville against wide receivers. So let's do wide receivers, and Jacksonville will be at the bottom of this list right here. And what you'll see immediately is they've only allowed 6.6 DraftKings points to opposing wide receivers. Now, also keep in mind, that counts every wide receiver. If a guy catches one ball, that's included, but since everyone's on the same playing field, they're still the best in the league. But look at the names they've faced, okay? Essentially, no one. Tennessee has no good wide receivers. Baltimore has no good wide receivers. The Jets, no good wide receivers. The Rams, no good wide receivers. And Indy, with their quarterback and offense, really no good wide receivers. So the 2 times they've actually faced good top 5 wideouts, it's been DeAndre Hopkins in week 1 who scored 18 DraftKings points, and Antonio Brown in week 28 in week 6 that scored, or week 5 that scored 28 DraftKings points. So when they faced a top 5 wide receiver, they've struggled. I think this rank, and don't get me wrong, I like Jacksonville, but the fact that they're dead last or first, whatever you want to call it, in DraftKings points allowed to opposing wide receivers is very much dictated by their schedule. So I'm not really taking that into account. And AJ Green is still a guy who gets a ton of targets. He's like top 5 in the league in targets. He is a bit feast or famine, as we see when we... Sorry, let me get out of here. We'll find his game logs. Here we go. You'll see here he's a bit feast or famine. 31 week, 37, 7. So I think there's risk there, but I think the risk is justified because you're probably going to get him at a really low ownership. I'm really intrigued by that. And then the other guy that you saw on these projections here is Nelson Aguilar, who is my second highest projected wide receiver, which is interesting. So $4,800, a really good price here. He is starting to show that upside or those skills that the Eagles drafted him so highly for. He scored 14 or more DraftKings points in the last 3 weeks. He's caught a touchdown in 3 of the last 4. It seems as if he's starting to build a rapport with, the ever-improving Carson Wentz. And, this seems like an opportunity for him to kind of continue the trend. He's priced really well. It's one of these situations where he jumps off the screen at me for the projections, and I feel obligated to talk about him and point out that he is on a bit of a pretty good run here. And then let's wrap this up with tight ends. So Travis Kelce, by far my highest projected tight end. We talked about the game, heavy usage, lots of points, Dallas, check off all the boxes. Cameron Brate checks in next, and this is really cool. So Brate checks in at $4,500, and I was almost, even myself, a little bit surprised when I pulled up his game logs earlier. Because here is Brate, and let's just do everything since week 3. Right? I'll cherry pick a little bit, but it is 6 consecutive weeks. So he has scored double-digit DraftKings points in every week since week 3, 6 games, and he's averaging 15.5 DraftKings points in that span. Just as a comparison, so 15.5 for Cameron Brate in that span, the last 6 weeks, since week 3. To compare, Gronk is averaging 15.7, 0.2 of a point more, and Zach Ertz is averaging 16 DraftKings points. So just strictly on averages since week 3, those guys are essentially on a level playing field, and Cameron Brate costs $4,500 this week. How can you overlook that with the type of production that he's put up? So Cameron Brate really perked my ears up when I was going through this earlier. And then I'll end with one more, and you probably saw him here on my cheat sheet. It's Evan Ingram right here, and it's a guy we've talked about a lot. But again, there's so much that if you just take a deeper look at, these numbers don't always add up, or they're you can see them differently. So here's Evan Ingram's season, and what I've actually done, and I didn't even do this on purpose, what I've actually done is I've excluded week 5 when he didn't score a single DraftKings point. And I think it's because he did not have a single target. So I have to go back and look that these game logs only show up if you received a single target. So it tries to remove people who it tries to remove players that don't play. And it essentially thought Evan Ingram did not play week 5. So that's what's happening here. But for our purposes, it's actually pretty good because if you throw out the game that he just absolutely laid a goose egg, you get this, and it's a pretty good season. So he's averaging 16.4 DraftKings points since week 4, which is the last 3 games, and he's seeing a massive number of targets. I mean, that is 30 targets over the last 3 weeks. With 4 coming in the red zone, which is the second most targets on the Giants. And he's caught 3 of those 4 red zone targets for touchdowns, which is the most touchdowns in the red zone for the New York Giants. So he's clearly a high leverage situation type receiver where they get down inside the 20, they get down inside the 10, and Ingram is popping up all over the place. He's seen 30 targets in the last 3 weeks. The Giants are coming off a bye. This is a really interesting situation, and I know a lot of people wrote him off after the week where he literally did nothing. He might as well have stood on the sideline. But I'm not sure that that's the case. So we'll go back to it again. He's a pretty decent price, and again, this is always a position that is so difficult to try to figure out what to do with tight ends. So I think those are some pretty good options. Let me know what you think about that. If I'm an idiot, let me know. If you thought some of it was cool, let me know. You can tweet me. It's @DFS on demand, or leave a comment below. Talk to you guys soon. See ya.